Hi, my name is Matt LeClaire. I'm the executive editor at the Fayetteville Observer. I'm with John Henderson. He's our City Hall reporter. And we are very happy to have with us today at the Observer City Councilman Dan Culliton of District 2. And we're going to be talking about the issue of train horns and the proposal for the city to take a closer look at whether or not a quiet zone is a good idea for Fayetteville, which would mean no horns or softer horns, if you will, and I'll let Mr. Culliton explain that a little bit better, through our downtown area. So I will first thank you very much for being here today.
Absolutely.
And if you want to give us just a quick explanation of what a quiet zone is and why is this something that you think Fayetteville should explore?
Absolutely, and those are great points, and I want to get that information out. Let me first just say that this is something that was brought to me a number of times by many of my constituents, and brought to me for various reasons. And so as a representative, I have the duty to bring that discussion forward. What I'll say is that initial reaction was much like many others had when I heard about this, that safety would be compromised, of course, economic development may be helped, but for me, I don't think $1 of economic development is worth compromising the safety of our citizens. And so when I researched this, the surprising thing that hit me was that these have been proven, these quiet zones or no horn zones. I think that quiet zone or reduced horn zone is probably a better terminology for them. Mm-hmm. Had been proven to be safer than current horn zones. And that was surprising. And so then when I researched and looked into it further, I realized the reasons for that. These quiet zones, which are the requirements to be able to implement a quiet zone into an area, is set by the FRA. The FRA is the Federal Railway Administration. And they set these standards in place for municipalities looking to improve the quality of life for their citizens. And because of that, when municipalities look to implement a quiet zone, they have to upgrade their safety mechanisms. Horns are a safety device. I obviously understand that. However, it's a bit antiquated in some ways. You have to understand that horns, train horns, were a safety device of the early 20th century. You know, that's 1900, and so we've come a long way in the last 100 years with our technology, and certainly with our safety technology. And so by looking to do a quiet zone, it forces a municipality to reevaluate the safety of those crossings and upgrade them to modern standards.
I think that from what we've seen, comments online, on social media, after we first reported this, the first reaction among a lot of people was, if you don't have horns, that there could be an increased risk of people not knowing that the train is coming, maybe ignoring the light, or in downtown there's a section, certainly by the new transit center, where you've got a lot of people, a lot of pedestrians, baseball stadium, a lot of people walking around. Can you understand the initial reaction among some people that why would you not want to have a horn?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and look, I'm a District 2 resident, and I live just off of downtown. I frequent the area as a pedestrian. I ride my bikes with my son there. So safety is definitely a concern, and I'm well aware of it. Again, I wouldn't compromise $1 of economic growth for the safety of our citizens. And I also want to clarify that, John, since your original article came out, there's been a plethora, right, of comments on social media, and a very vocal outcry against it. And unfortunately, some of them really resort to personal ridicule, and I understand that as a public official. But what I don't like is that discussion to be shouted down or not have, because I don't think that's ever a good thing. And so one of the things I wanted to clarify is that a little bit of how City Council really operates. In order for a council member to bring a discussion to the whole body, we have something called the council member request. And so that's what I submitted, a council member request for discussion of this topic. That was done at the work session. Unfortunately, that work session had a number of topics that generated a lot of discussion, and with the appointments of the county commissioners, we just didn't have time to get to the last 3 items, one being this issue here. And so the discussion never took place, and it was tabled to the January work session.
Right.
But what would have occurred is a discussion around what we're kind of having now as to looking at this. Personally, after reviewing this and seeing the amount of economic investment we're making into our downtown, folks, we're pouring over $100 million into our downtown for the purpose of economic development, right?
Public and private.
Public and private, that's correct. And that's a significant investment, and that investment is for jobs. That's what we want. We want jobs, we want to grow our economy, we want to grow our city. I feel it's imperative as us as a council to not only ensure the best safety of our citizens, when we have a couple hundred folks moving in February, residents are investing in our town as well. And their safety is important, as well as the quality of life issues and the obvious economic impacts that something like this could have.
Let me say, as you're watching this, if you have questions about how a quiet zone would work, or any other questions on this particular topic for Councilman Culliton, please add those to the comments, and we'll be pulling a few of those and posing those questions to you. One thing that I have seen, there's a question of would the city take on any additional liability if there was some type of accident, if we were to go this route?
It's a great question, and that's something that will be determined if and when council decides to look into this further. Again, this was a discussion as to whether we wanted to do that. If the council as a collective body decides this is something that requires or that we should look into and have, that's what would come out of that. What I can say is that since there are over 815 quiet zones throughout the country right now, there's 7 just in North Carolina. All of those have shown to be as safer. And the liabilities of that, from what I've been able to research, and I'm not an expert on this, folks, but from my research and looking into it, I don't see that liability was increased in any of those municipalities via the city.
Have you come up with a cost estimate?
That's another hard one to get at, because we have to first do the analysis. There are multiple crossings just within our downtown. One of the parameters in looking at a quiet zone is that the FRA mandates that it's a half-mile long. That's a pretty long stretch. You could be talking from one end of the downtown all the way to the
Quiet zone would be a half mile?
Correct.
It could be a mile too, right?
It could be longer. It has to be at least a half.
At least that.
Yeah. And so
It should be, so you said like Massey Hill.
Sure, it could cover a long distance depending on what crossings you want to address. In addressing a quiet zone, you can do 1 or you could do 20 depending how much your city has and what the council ultimately might decide. Those crossings have different safety features. Look, we have a crossing right in our downtown at Hay Street, right, that has no arms. They're blinking lights.
We don't have any arms in downtown, do we?
Well, that's one thing that I think warrants a discussion. We're looking at bringing thousands of patrons into our downtown on a regular basis. We are definitely having increased residential development occurring. We need to look at these safety aspects. We need to do something better to protect our citizens, in my opinion. We at least warrants a discussion on it.
Can you talk a little bit more about, you said before this started that in a quiet zone you could actually have horns at the crossings instead of on the trains?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So when I say it's a bit of an antiquated mechanism, the horns, the train horns, and let me also take this opportunity to let people know that train horns are very loud. We all know that. Anybody sitting at Husk Hardware on the patio and has a train go by, we couldn't have this conversation even if we were yelling at the top of our lungs. Those decibels at 96 to I believe it's 108 are physically damaging to the human ear. And that's how loud they are. With that said, we've had improvements in the last 100 and some years on horns. We can have what's called wayside horns or directional horns, which may be one of the advanced safety mechanisms that we decide to put in place when looking at this.
Right.
Those are horns that are placed at the crossing to direct that horn down the street. It does a couple of things. One thing it does is it contains the extraneous sound from that horn to the establishments and residences, and it directs it down the street so that it's more effective for motorists and pedestrians. And so because of that directional capability, they can also have a reduced decibel level, which becomes safer.
And that would be considered a quiet zone as well? by?
It's one mechanism that you could put in place or may be required in order to have a quiet zone.
There's like double gates too. There's other.
That's another safety. There are multiple safety advancements that we've had, and when you look at implementing a quiet zone, part of that assessment is what would be required in order to get that approved by the FRA.
Who decides what would be required? Is that
FRA.
the Federal Railroad Administration?
That's correct.
So they would.
They'd have to approve.
They would take a look at, okay, you got this half-mile stretch through this segment of the city that you're looking at. You would have to do this here, this here, and this here.
That's correct. Sometimes the municipalities don't have to do anything. They can just label it a quiet zone because they have the safety.
You intend to bring it up in January with the council, is that correct?
Yes, it's still on the agenda for the work session in January because we're unable to get to it. Folks, I have to apologize. I'm, like many, getting over a cold, so
yeah, me too.
I'm drinking water and clearing the throat, that's why.
Okay, very good.
What about the economic development benefits of this? You were talking to me about that last week.
Absolutely, and Robert Van Goens, who's off camera here today, who heads up the Fayetteville Cumberland County Economic Development Corp, is very well versed in this, as he put that in, or was at least part of the administration in Salisbury when they implemented theirs. Surprising things that came out of that, and it took a number of years for them, I believe, to get that done, was that it became very popular with the citizenry once it was implemented. That safety wasn't lowered in any way. And also what I found surprising was that traffic flow was actually improved with the mechanism they put in place, as well as railroad operations. And so, the railroad's an important part of our economy, it's an important part of our city, it's part of our history. And so in no way is this a legislation or a discussion against the railroad. Let's make that clear.
Yeah.
But we also have a downtown we want to develop. And Fayetteville hasn't addressed the multiple crossings and railways in our downtown, or the Amtrak commuter train. Most cities who want to develop their downtown have addressed those issues, whether they reroute the tracks, bring them underground or overground. And this discussion has come up. It came up in the 70s, I believe, and since then.
This applies to Amtrak too.
It can, yeah. And then, of course, those commuter trains move at a much faster rate. It's a great benefit to our city. But what's surprising is that when cities and municipalities look at this, at times they can do things to combine tracks, crossings, switching, that improve overall railroad operations and efficiency. So that was also an interesting thing that came out of my research.
I do think that a popular move would be to make changes so that trains don't have to stop in downtown and back up and go forward. But I know that from my understanding of that over the years has been that would be quite a costly endeavor.
Yeah, one of the things that, and you'd have to verify this with the FRA, but my understanding that I got was that when you have these quiet zones in place, one of the reasons traffic flow is improved, and we've all been stuck with the trains in that gridlock in our downtown, as well as the railroad efficiency and operations, is because those trains can go at a more consistent speed. They're no longer at that point because we have implemented the advanced safety features. They don't need to slow, they can go at a more consistent speed through it.
Sounds like you think this could lead to a much safer and more efficient railroad system downtown.
I think it absolutely, there's no question that it could. The question that we have before us is whether we're willing to invest in that, and whether we're willing to invest in the safety of our citizens. I definitely think that, at least it's beholden to me to bring this discussion to council. As a good representative of my district and those constituents who have been asking me since I took this seat to bring this in front of council, to at least have this discussion, and why nobody was willing to have it prior to this.
Are you surprised at the initial backlash you got from this?
A little bit. But I think it's, it's understandable given the amount of information people were given and the way in which they were given it. And so I'm, grateful for the opportunity now to hopefully offer a little bit more education, a little bit more information on this, so that people can make an informed decision.
Very good. Again, if you're just starting to watch us, we are taking questions. So if you have something you'd like to know about how quiet zones work, or or this proposal with Councilman Dan Culliton, just add your comments to it, to this video, and we'll pose your questions. Have you gotten a reaction from, since this came up last week, from downtown business owners, people who are invested in downtown?
Absolutely. And this is some of the constituents who brought it to me initially. And I'm not talking about the wealthy developers. I know there was comments floating around that this is all for wealthy development, etc. Look, folks, any economic development, whether it's in our downtown or otherwise, benefits our entire city. It benefits our citizens because it's bringing jobs, growth, and stimulating our tax base, which we need. With that said, there are businesses that this will directly impact. We have a baseball stadium we all know we're putting in. Part of that complex is going to be 2 restaurants that are going to have outdoor seating and the entrance of that stadium. That is just off the railroad tracks. Now, aside from the safety aspect, which should be primary on this, think of the quality of life, the customer service element of this, when those folks are sitting down and are having those loud whistles. Now, if that's what, as a community and as a council, we decide, okay, but I think the discussion should be had.
Okay. Another question I see from our Facebook viewers, you addressed this a little bit earlier, but is there any idea of, so if we, to get approved, if we were going to go forward with this, the federal government would say you'd have to do X, Y, Z at these crossings and make whatever other changes, safety improvements, in order to have a quiet zone of some type. Would the city have to pay for those improvements, and any idea of how much that could cost?
That's a great question. So whoever asked it, thank you. That's an important concern because these can be costly depending on what is needed to bring those safety standards up to modern safety standards. So there's a couple ways to go here, and it all depends on, again, what is looking to be done. Excuse me, that itch is starting to creep up in my throat. So,
we'll go as long as you can talk.
Oh, anybody knows me knows I can talk. Okay, so one of the reasons I think the timing was so important on this is there is, through the FRA, a grant, federal railway grant, of over $300 million. And that is for improved safety features of railroad crossings.
That's available to any community in the country?
Correct, who has done the work, the legwork, and put in the time and effort to assess their safety standards. We have not. And so I think we need to start this discussion in order that if it's council's prerogative to move forward, that we have our ducks in a row, so to speak, so that we can be, hopefully, first in line for that money. And that is one option.
So, so that would be a federal grant?
Correct.
To pay for all or most of it?
That's correct.
Is there a timetable on that you're aware of?
No, but I did talk to a FRA representative who said that there was a CRUSI grant, an acronym used, that was being reassessed, and that right now that was put on hold. But part of the reassessment process was they wanted to make it more readily available for these quiet zones. Okay. And so again, timing is imperative on this. You know, if we get left behind, there's already 815 cities in the country who've done this. There's 7 just in North Carolina. If Fayetteville doesn't keep pace, we will be left behind. And I don't want to see that happen to my city. You know, folks, I may not be from here, but I've lived here and I'm invested here. My children were born here, and I want to see this city become what I know it is and should be. And so I think we need to be on track with these initiatives and be ready to hopefully access that federal money and grant money when it does become available.
It took like, I think 10 years in Salisbury, took 10 years from the time they first started talking about it till when it happened. I don't know if that was because of political reasons, but do you know how long it would take? Any idea?
No, Mr. Mangones may be able to address this better than I can, but I do know it took some time. I don't know the reasons beyond that. Right. You know, I don't know if that was a the will of the council there, right, to get it through, or if it was delays, or if that's just the length of process. I do believe it can be done much more rapidly than a decade.
So the city would have to hire somebody, like a consultant, to do a study?
Well, we already have. We have Lee Jernigan here now with our traffic services that could probably answer this. But there will be assessments done by DOT and traffic services as well as the FRA. We get that information to them. They then plug it in as to what those safety measures might be or need to be in order to bring it up to a quiet zone standard. And then at that point, you can start breaking out the cost analysis on that. And then that could then, again, be what's needed to be ready to submit to any type of federal funding that may be available.
If I could ask you about some of the comments that I've seen and questions from the public and readers have been, and if I could just paraphrase it, why is this particular issue so important, and why should this be a priority of a councilman or a city council? And I wonder if you could just address that for our viewers now.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, because it's a good one. Hopefully at this point people understand why it's an important issue, at least a discussion of it. We're talking about safety of our citizens, we're talking about economic development, we're talking about quality of life, we're talking about walkability in a city that was rated the least walkable in the country. So I think it's at least an important issue that we should have a discussion about. Now, as far as the other aspect of this, I want folks to understand that this is not a zero-sum game. This is not one issue negates the validity or the ability to us to address another issue. Council should and must and does handle multiple issues at a time. Just because I brought this for discussion does not mean that I am not constantly working on all the other issues. And folks, District 2 is a very large and diverse district. It has an immense amount of needs and an immense amount of diversity of needs. It has the richest and the poorest streets of all of Fayetteville. Because I'm bringing this forth for these constituents, makes it no less important for the other issues that I'm addressing in other parts of the district. So this is not a zero-sum game. I owe it to my constituents to handle and address and be all of their voice on council.
Okay. And another question that has come up has been, if you have some form of a quiet zone, either no horns or a directional lower decibel horn,
Wayside horn.
The conductor of the train still can sound the full blast horn if needed, right?
Very important point to bring about. And this is something that, folks, I didn't know until I started looking into this either. We have logic that we think, but then with further information and education on COVID, that changes. That's something that changed for me. I realized that that horn does stay on that train. It's just that federal regulations without a quiet zone, because of the decrease of safety standards on a just horn zone as opposed to a quiet zone.
When you don't have a
when you don't have those advanced
gates.
safety measures and gates and other safety mechanisms in place, and we just have a horn zone where you might need just a railroad crossing and a horn, that conductor is federally mandated to start sounding that horn. I'm talking about the horn that's damaging to the human ear that we all hear now, a quarter mile in advance, and they need to sound that all the way through. When you look at a quiet zone, because of the improved safety measures, that takes that responsibility away from them. However, it does not take away their ability or responsibility to sound that horn in a case of emergency, even in a quiet zone. So if they see something that's on the track that shouldn't be there for whatever reason, a disabled vehicle, a pedestrian, etc., they have the ability, even in a reduced horn, no horn, or quiet zone, to sound that horn.
All right, good. Do you know, so we mentioned Salisbury has a quiet zone for 3 years now. John reported on Sunday. Do you know what the other communities are in the state?
Within the state that have quiet zones?
Yeah.
I knew you were going to ask me that. So,
I think you got it right.
Kannapolis, well, I had a couple. Yeah, that's not all of them. Kannapolis is one. We have Salisbury. Apex is another. New Bern, Rocky Mount. I also know that Wilmington, Charlotte, Raleigh, and cities like Columbia, South Carolina, and Rock Hill, South Carolina, they are all currently assessing this.
So Raleigh and Charlotte are looking at establishing
Absolutely,
quiet zones.
absolutely, and you know what? They're all going to be looking for that same federal money.
Yeah. Well, anything else on this issue that you want to address?
No, I'm just here really, you know, as a representative to give whatever information I have so people can be more informed about the topic, and you know, I'm willing to answer any questions that you folks have.
Well, we've had some good comments here. If you tune in later after we've posted this to our website, or didn't get a chance to ask a question or think of anything else on this issue, speaking for Councilman Culliton, I'm sure that he wouldn't mind if you reach out to him directly, or reach out to our reporter, John Henderson, who covers City Hall and city issues. And we will be happy to explore those questions or try to find answers for you.
And one other thing I may mention, folks, is that you know, I'm not alone in this in terms of where the support is or anything like that. Our Economic Development Corporation supports this initiative. The Cool Spring District supports this
The downtown
discussion.
entertainment district.
We have had Jordan Jones make a comment to you, which I was unaware of.
Jordan Jones, the developer
of the Prince Charles. Yeah, I was unaware, but in your article I read that he is in full support of this.
Very, very strongly in support.
Yeah, much of our city staff, I believe, is in support of this, and much of the other businesses, residents of downtown, are in support of this. So again, as their representative, I'm beholden to bring this forth and have this discussion.
Okay. Well, we certainly appreciate you coming in and taking some time to talk about this proposal. It's certainly one that a lot of people are interested in, so we'll see what happens. And thank you all for watching us today.
Thank you, folks.